Welcome, and I am so excited to be here today with three of the authors from the second Changing Workbook that has been published, Leading with Compassion, Cultivating Connection from the Inside Out, that was available February 14th, 2025. I am here today with three authors, and we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about why we wrote these chapters and the impact it had, and just a little bit more so that you can learn about us. And I want to share, we've got Quentin Finney, Karen Frozio, and Jaspel Bajwa. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you. And I've asked the authors to introduce themselves because I think that gives them so much more to share from just hearing me read it. So Quentin, do you want to, sorry, I'm going to start first. So for me, I'm Rachel O'Mara. I'm the moderator. I'm based in San Francisco and also Sarasota, Florida. Today I'm in San Francisco, but I was part of the first book and I'm a member of chapter of Changing Work. I wrote a chapter in the first book of leading with self-awareness. I worked at Google for 13 years in sales and client services, and I left a couple years ago to focus full-time on my passion, which is helping our leaders be better leaders and rising to their next level through emotional intelligence, whether it's coaching, speaking, or writing. So with that, Quentin, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Quentin Finney. I live in Boulder, Colorado currently. And yeah, long career, several decades, decade and a half in the military. And then I went into high tech about 2.5 decades ago. Lots of different roles, mostly focused on the sales side, 6 different startups. So a little bit of a passion for startups. Um, yeah, also spent 6 years at Google with Rachel. And really left to focus more on coaching and consulting and program facilitation, teaching. My passion really is on human flourishing and helping people come together in ways that thrive from a place of connection. And that's what I love to do.
And
So
that's
thanks
what
for
your
the
book's
intro.
here for too. Yay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Awesome. And how about the following with that? Let's go with the next chapter. I think it's 14, right?
Is that is that
With
me,
Karen. Sorry.
Rachel? Okay. So I did not work at Google, but I did spend
That's okay.
I'm
We still love you. It's all right.
thank you,
Totally.
thank you. I'm in Atlantic Beach, Florida, the northeastern part of Florida. But I spent like 30 plus years, working my way up the corporate ladder into senior leadership roles with national teams. And, personally, I intermittently struggled with handling all the industry challenges and, not succumbing to burnout. But along the way, I saw many people who did leave their chosen professions or they moved into this space that we all kind of call that quiet quitting or survival mode. So I founded Revive Joy, which is my business, to dedicate my energy to helping those who help others sustain their well-being and to continue making a difference. And so I partner with organizations to equip teams and individuals with practical strategies, both personally and professionally. Topics like building resilience, kind of the same stuff, some of the same stuff, emotional intelligence, and fostering that compassionate leadership to create the lasting positive change.
Thank you. And how about you, Jespel?
Thank you, Rachel. And it was wonderful to hear from fellow colleague Quentin and Karen. A few words about myself. I'm calling in from Toronto area in Canada. My first home, my second home still exists, and that's in India. I've been very fortunate, 35 years in various corporate jobs, mostly as a profit center head, but sometimes as a strategic person in the corporate offices. After 35 years, I said, let me go back to my passion, which was to surround myself with people smarter than me, younger than me. And so for the last 15 years, I've been a full-time coach, doing executive coaching, one-on-one. For other profit center heads, could be region presidents or CXOs, as well as their teams. So I'm also a team coach. And as a practitioner come learner for lifelong learning, I think I'm just, wanting to bring my learnings to everyone through a simple motto I have developed for myself. Jaspal, I think you've been born to just learn, comma, unlearn, relearn so that you can be of service. And that's what I'm living out in this particular adventure of writing together with 25 other colleagues.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Jespal. Yes, so I should also mention we have 25 contributing authors from the Changing Work Collective who contributed to this book, Leading with Compassion. And all of us are essentially wanting to change work from the inside out. And you can hear that with everyone in what we're sharing in our bios. So excited to dive in. So Quentin, your chapter is chapter 10. I know, Karen, your chapter is chapter 14, and Jespo, your chapter is chapter 20. So if anyone wants to just immediately jump in and read those, that's who we're speaking with. I'm going to start with you, Quentin, since we're going to just go in the order of the chapter. So it's just business. I enjoyed your chapter so much and really related as a fellow Googler and someone who's had said those words, and also, really made me think about those words and what they truly mean and how it is, but it isn't. So I'd love you to share a little bit about why did you choose this topic, and why is it important for you to get this message out?
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect. My daughter will be 21 in March. So what I open with, and that story that I opened with was 21 years ago. It was a month before she was born. Actually, it was about right now. And just been reflecting on things in the experience of working in the world and things that create connection, things that create disconnection. I've had to lay people off myself. It never got easier after the first time. I don't think that it should be an experience that you get accustomed to or acclimated to.
Yeah.
There's just such a need and a necessity to focus on the dignity of the human who's affected by the business decisions. And so in no way do I suggest that we don't need to make difficult business decisions, but there are ways that we can relate to how we execute those decisions that respect the dignity of the humans who are affected. And, it may have been 21 years ago when I heard that for the first time in the context of a layoff, but it is not by any means the last time that I heard it. And so, there's been a lot of layoff experience the last couple of years. This has been something top of mind. And in fact, tech layoffs was one of the catalytic sparks for forming Changing Work. And so just thinking about that whole experience and how can we be more compassionate when these things happen? Sometimes they're necessary, sometimes they're not. But like, I have a friend who spent 17 years in one of the tech firms who was laid off by email after 17 years. And like, I just wanted to call to mind that this is not the way we should be with one another. So
Yeah.
that was the spark and the impulse and the mission, if you will, to try and reinsert the role of compassion in how we execute difficult business decisions.
It's so timely. I thought the same thing because, even though you probably wrote this chapter months ago and
Did.
had that experience 21 years ago, it's still happening, and we still need to bring compassion, which I think is such an important message that you share in that chapter. So for anyone who's either been through a layoff, who's listening, or needing to lay others off, like, this is a required reading chapter. Please
Oh,
read.
thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story.
Mm.
Karen, for you, so in your chapter, All Rise, tell me a little bit about why you chose that subject. I know it's a very personal subject and very vulnerable thing to share, but also is a very compelling story. So, tell us about, what prompted you to write this one for you?
It was funny when we were first asked to think of a topic or a story to share, a pivotal moment in our leadership journey. This just popped to mind immediately. And then I thought, right before I submitted the topic for approval at the beginning, I thought, oh gosh, I can't do this. I can't, because it is often our personal experiences or stories, and often things that are hard, that do create the most change for us. And one of the things that I reflected back on with this, the reason I titled it All Rise, is because so much of our life life. And really for all of our lives, they start out with contests. When you think about, we learn to win. We do races as kids, right? In my life, I worked to try to get first chair in orchestra, the lead in the school musical. Class rankings are by your GPA. You beat out other applicants for limited spots in, grad school, or for the work promotion. But when the focus is on being our best, or the focus is on the goal, we're leaving other people behind. And, I was thinking recently, like, because I've taken up pickleball at my husband's prodding, and you have you play in doubles most of the time. If somebody fell and hurt their leg, say they even broke their leg, I wouldn't just say, "Come on, get up. We got to finish the game. One for all for one and one for all." I can't. I wouldn't just push them on, because they really don't know how hurt they are. And I refer in my chapter to the walking wounded, because from the story that I shared, which is a very personal story of loss, and I thought I was so alone and just assumed nobody knew what was going on with me. It was really that recognition that, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on with them. And today, Quentin, I don't know what's going on with you, or you, Rachel, or you, Jaspal, But what I can do is know that typically we all kind of have these facades going on in place as we attempt to function normally on any given day. So I really wanted to help us focus on recognizing that everybody's got these unseen injuries, and we could all use some compassion. Um, and compassion often starts with recognizing those unconscious assumptions, that we make about others. And so I do talk about assumptions in my chapter, and also because that kind of goes hand in hand with being vulnerable and vulnerability, which really enables that true connection that we want to have with others and that momentum. So for me, I really just wanted to share, how I've learned to look at others differently and to look at everyone with an inquisitive mind instead of, I used to be very, very goal oriented. I'd race into a meeting with my agenda. Even with a new relationship, there might be some goal in mind when you're first meeting somebody. You want to learn something or get something from them. And I tell you what, I just, it helped me do an about face, so that now with All Rise, I'm hoping that we're all going to work to create these environments where we can be our true selves, which is really our best selves.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, thank you. And I resonate a lot with that sentence. We'll talk more about it. We are all walking wounded. Really struck me in your chapter. So thank you. Lots of that in what you shared. And Jasper, how about you? I love the experience that you bring to your chapter. You talk about 3 decades in the business world, a decade as a coach. Like by far, I feel like the deep experience you bring, it really resonated and shows up in your chapter. So what prompted you to share what you did, and why?
I think I would like to build on what Karen just shared, that assumptions, we, all of us who've been fortunate to be executives, and in my case, very fortunate, those 35 years, just about every assignment was initially considered impossible. But because of great teams that I was fortunate to be a member of and then a leader of, we were always able to deliver significant and sustainable results. Importantly, with a sense of joy and resilience. So, just wanted to build on what we heard from Quentin and Karen, that this word compassion is, at least for me, it was relatively later in life that I heard it and then tried to understand it. I'd heard about kindness and charity and sympathy, empathy, but compassion came a little later in my life as a vocabulary. So I thought I would like to share my own experience of getting to know the word compassion, or not just the word, but the deeply, richly textured value that we as humans can choose to have in compassion. And how did I discover it? So my chapter got titled as Compassion in Action. Where does it begin? And just like we heard from Karen, it begins probably, at least that's what I found for myself, it begins with the self. My own ability to be aware of and then accept with grace and gratitude what we all are blessed with. And of all the successes that I had, I was reflecting, where did I learn the most about compassion? And surprisingly, it was the downturns. It was the defeats. Each time we fell, each time we had bloody noses, and each time we raised, as Karen says, all rise. Each time we raised each other in the trenches. I think that is where I was discovering what compassion is all about in practice or in action. So in just about 1900 words, which is what we were asked to restrict to. So I tried to be less is more, but I tried to communicate that that is where the journey starts with the self, but it is completed only together with others, the experiences that we have. And it is the downturns, the defeats, the mistakes, the pain, the suffering that often hides a huge potential to discover what compassion in action or in practice is all about. So that's what I ended up writing. I did leave behind a very simple, easy to sort of remember formula which said, hey, let's not go to the Z, A to Z. Let's just stick with the A. And I sort of chose 7 A's. Some of them you heard me say, my ability to accept myself, my ability to be aware of the reality that I am in, and then adapt to it. Choose to reframe and adapt to it, but together with others. And therefore, I ended the chapter by saying perhaps 7 A's, including continuing to live in my own authenticity, continuing to ask in all humility for not that Superman complex I must have had as a young, successful executive, but I wrote about how I broke my leg on the soccer field and how, I learned humility in so many different ways. So I think the takeaway for me at the end of the chapter is living in our own authenticity and surrounded by folks who are together with you on the journey. It's always possible to transform yourself, transform the situation you find yourself in with a huge amount of compassion and end up getting that sense of joy, not just through successes, but also through the downturns in life. So that's what I ended up writing about. And if I had worked with Quentin and Karen earlier, I would have taken 2 more A's, the 8th and the 9th. Um, for example, Quentin writes about in his chapter, acknowledge the impact that you have as a human, as a fellow human, as a leader. And Karen asked me to be aware of assumptions that I might be making. So who knows, if had we written a 3% chapter, we would have had 9 A's and not 7 A's to write
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, you're here. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, all of you, for sharing a little more context and what drew you to your subjects and what you shared. And just from you, I'm hearing, even with the most uh, tumultuous and extreme uncomfortableness and discomfort, we can still come out the other side. And Karen, Quinn, you both kind of share this too, is come on the other side and you're better off for it, and you have a different perspective, and you look back and those were the times that really made us, like that's what molded us into who we are today. And I think that's very powerful for all of us, and what, not just you writing your story, but those who have their own stories, who aren't the writers reading the book, because there's so much to learn, and we just think of it as the pain or the challenge at the time, and yet we know we can get through that. So thank you for sharing your stories. All of you were beautifully vulnerable in ways, and just really brought your full self into that chapter, which was compassion for yourself, I would say, too. Let's go back to you, Quentin. I know from the It's Just Business, and you also were part of the first book. All right. So I'm curious, what was this writing process like for you in the second book? And like, was it different? Was it the same? And what did you learn about yourself as you did that?
Um, Yeah, I mean, in the last book I wrote about perfectionism, which comes into play a little bit too. Like being human can be hard, like allowing ourselves to be human in the context of teams we lead. Doesn't matter whether I'm an individual contributor, on the sales side, I'm still affecting people up and down. Sometimes we say you manage up, you manage adjacent, you manage down, or all the way up to the roles I had as chief revenue officer on the chief operating officer side. It doesn't really matter. There's a lot of pressure to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
not to be human, not to be humble. And like, I think it's really critically important. One of the things that Just Paul was talking about in terms of being humble, when we deliver news or there's a difficult experience, especially in a downturn, we're kicking people into an amygdala response, right? This is a survival mechanism, and we're not meant to live this life alone. And when we're, quote, passed off the island, in something like a layoff, it affects our perspective. Exile in past times was death. If you were cast out of the tribe, you weren't going to survive. And so that base level feeling is there in the body, and it can shift from being a humbling experience to being a humiliating experience, depending on how it's delivered. And we all have humbling experiences, but we don't need to make someone else feel humiliated in the process. So,
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
really good. And on that note, you wrote, I want to just cite you here. Compassionate leadership is not about making the decisions easier. It's about making the decisions kinder.
Yeah.
And I think that's just what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So from our side, for anyone who's going through this now, what would be like, instead of saying it's just business, what would you invite them to think, to say differently?
uh, take a different perspective. We talked about walking in somebody else's moccasins, or understanding the other person's perspective a little bit. So like, nothing personal, it's just business. Those words are not for the person listening to the words. They're for the speaker to create some insulating distance. And that's not going to be helpful, right? It's not going to be helpful to the person delivering the words, because it just creates disconnection. It's not helpful to the person receiving the words, because they feel like unseen, unvalued, unacknowledged. And so, like, really stepping into the place where those words don't get said, because I understand the impact of my own actions on myself and others.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
need to understand where I'm coming at it from, right?
Yeah. So just taking a minute to think about it in a way that could be more kind and helpful for you and the receiver. Thank you. Or
Yeah, and constructive, so there's an opportunity for growth.
yeah.
When my kids or my teams have an experience of failure, I just ask two things. What have you learned? And how are you going to apply the lesson? And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we got
Thank
balloons.
Wow. Hallelujah. That was a really cool graphic that we just created. Love it. And then
You
we
know,
got,
while you're on that, there's a line in that you put in there, Quentin, that goes with that. You said you really hope that these spaces can be created where empathy and compassion coexist with
Yeah.
efficiency.
Yeah.
Like that really stuck with me. I really liked that.
Well, thank you,
Really
Karen.
liked that.
that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's not an either or, you know.
No,
It's
no.
this and that's what we've got to get to. I think a lot of people are frightened of giving something up. They're going to give up efficiency, or the goals aren't going to be met, and that kind of thing. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge we have with a lot of leaders, or a lot of people in our lives,
Mhm.
in our world, our relationships that we have. It can be personal or professional, but I think that's one of the biggest issues is that these can coexist.
Yes.
Yeah, and back to your focus on assumptions,
Yeah.
right? We assume we have to do it that way,
Yes.
and we
Well, it's
don't.
always been done that way.
Yeah, right. And we don't
God
have to
forbid
do it that
anything
way.
changes, right?
I love
Yeah,
it.
Uh, we
yeah.
do. We think that. Yeah.
Yes. Challenging those assumptions is so big.
Yeah.
And Karen, for you, how was it for you writing this as your chapter? What did you learn about yourself, or would you like to share what that was like?
Oh, it was really my first time doing writing like that. So the most challenging thing was to be concise and to really reflect on um, what's the biggest takeaway? What's going to help somebody else? Because that's always our goal with our lives, right? How can my life be of service to others? And so I didn't want to just write a story because I had a story to share. I wanted to really think what would help somebody else from, you know, what I've learned. Because I'm like Joss Paul, I just really believe every single day, we're learning, we're learning, we're learning. And, I'm glad that I am because I need to be. But, I was taking a vulnerable story, Rachel. So it was hard at the beginning because it kind of took me back to it. But what was really neat to see was, and I think we already alluded to this several times, so I won't stay on that, but just again, positive that how positively that impacted my life. It was such a painful period of life and loss, and it so enriched my world and my connections with others. I would be such a different person and in such a different place and probably not doing the work I'm doing if that had not occurred. And it has, just impacted every single interaction and relationship that I have because I just look at everybody just like, oh, what is going on with you? What is behind that? How can I help? Or to get them to share. One of the things that hit me the hardest was seeing not just the growth that I've had, but the opportunities I still have for growth because you start talking about the assumptions people make and vulnerability, and yeah, I see where I have learned a lot and I'm being vulnerable in the book, or doing things differently now, but wow, it just really reminded me there's so much work to be done with all of us every day, because those are things that don't come easy. um, it's much easier to go with what I know and operate from that place than it is to take the time to think, wait a minute, I might be making an assumption that everybody's on board, or I might be making an assumption that they have the time to stay late, or to do this, or uh, that they understand what the request was, because I understand it, or just there's so many things. So it was good. It was a good process. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to highlight from your book, I couldn't decide on one thing. I had so many areas that really popped for me, and you already mentioned the first one, really just that, and it really resonated. We are all the walking wounded. There's so like that just goes hand in hand with your assumptions, which also you mentioned, they can when we can foster a more accepting environment for diversity and vulnerability and allow for deeper connections and personal development, that's when we look at that, that's when we can really truly honor like compassion for
Yeah.
ourselves and for others.
Yeah.
You also talk about otters, which I loved.
Oh, I know. They're
Little
precious
otters
animals, aren't they? They're so cute.
into your metaphors and micro moments of mindfulness tips, and these are some that the otters practice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have one now that you would like to share, just as a quick mindful tip that we can take away?
Sure. For me, with the mindfulness, it's funny because so many people, are kind of scared of that word, think we have to sit down and have a protract, long period of time, or in a certain position or a certain mantra that you're saying. And, you know, um, I was having difficulty fitting that into my life. And so I realized there were so many opportunities. And one of the biggest ones for me, because again, I err towards efficiency. So I err towards, next, 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 next. So that micro mindfulness, or I call it mobile mindfulness. So as I'm going throughout my day, what can I do? And one of the biggest ones for me, well, I'll do two, but one of the biggest ones for me is before my next interaction. So today, for example, Trisha, before we started recording, or maybe you said it, Rachel, I want to make sure I give the right person credit, but somebody said, let's all take a moment, take a deep breath, and think about our purpose here, and which is important before we enter into that next interaction, to that next activity, because we're often carrying the residue, emotional residue from one interaction to the next. So just taking a breath, taking a pause, and reflecting on what is the intent of this next interaction. And for me, that's wonderful mobile mindfulness, because then we're coming in with a clean slate to be present.
That's so great. And I thank you for sharing that and reminding us all. And yeah, things like walking into the room, what are you noticing? I think was another big one I
Yes.
liked from your list as well. Thank you. So Jasper,
Yeah.
for yourself, what was this process like weaving all these stories together? How was it for you? What did you learn about yourself?
I think it is wonderful. Learned patience, humility, uh,
All the things you were
and
writing about?
less is more. So, and camaraderie. That means doing it together with others. So, lots of learnings, and we'll carry those fond memories of doing this together. Um, I think each time I try to write, I learn that, the first time you write it, you're not being able to say what you want to say. So as the patience aspect helped, humility helped, getting it critiqued, not just by folks in conscious workplace, but also from my family. My wife and life partner of 47 years, my biggest critique. So, getting my ego once again downsized was, I think, the single biggest learning. And being able to share, as I said, I learned more from my defeats and my mistakes than from my victories and my team's victories. That was a big learning for me.
That's great. Thank you. And it's clear that there's so many, I think, many nuggets, like gold nuggets that you share. A few things that stood out to me, you talk about some tips for how to create compassion in action, like your title, and hire and fire with compassion, similar to Quentin's theme, and then also just to treat each other with dignity. I really love that as a tenant. Can you share about what is that for you and just a little bit about dignity in general for compassion?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, as I alluded earlier, compassion seems to be a very richly textured human value. It seems to have many layers in it. And I wanted to connect with what we just heard from Quentin and Karen when she said that it is an and, it's not an or. So as business leaders, I think increasingly there is this challenge of being able to address the needs of diverse stakeholder groups, not just profit alone, but we may have heard about planet, people, and profits. The debate of always was which one first. And I think in writing of this book, we are all of us being able to perhaps go on a journey of discovering our own humanity. And if there was a debate between profits, planet, and people, I think we got a chance to explore um, which one first. Without people, without relationships, without accepting that we are all interconnected and interdependent, where would just profits alone take us? So I think it's certainly an and compassionate leadership or other such forms of leadership we may have heard of, like transformational leadership, servant leadership. In 20, 30 years ago, people thought these were just niceties and it was just a feel-good factor. Fortunately for us now, in the last 20, 30 years, a lot of evidence that it actually works. And it works both for the hard stuff, tangibles, financials, but bottom lines, and for the intangibles like goodwill, good health, well-being, not just of us humans, but perhaps of all beings on the planet we share.
Mm.
So I think that's the exciting, I think, message that is coming through. Let's continue to discover who we are as humans, and it's a journey best traveled together. So that connecting from the inside out, certainly the first thing is to connect with our own selves. But the second thing, as Karen was saying, connecting with the moment, connecting with the others that you are together with in that moment. That is where I think we are, going to find even more richness in what compassion can bring into our lives. And it's not just a feel good. You do what you need to do. In wartime, you do what war asks you to do as leaders. And in peacetime, you should be able to pivot and equally do what peacetime asks you of a leader. So it's not one or the other. We've got to be able to be both and at the right place, right time, and be there for each other. So I think those were some, deep reasons why I thought I should share my learnings, because it sort of gives hope for a world which is otherwise being called volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous and even polarized. In that world, I think our book will bring a message of hope.
Yes. Well said. And that was gold. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it takes all of us to show up and be present, to connect, and to connect first with ourselves. And that's, I think, the skill that all of you are speaking to when you can serve and have compassion for others. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives and how important it is to lead with compassion. And again, just for everyone, we're going to wrap up here. We'll go around and see, share where we can find you. That would be wonderful. But the book, again, it's called Leading with Compassion. And it's available February 2025. And we've got 25 incredible authors. These are just 3. So imagine reading a book with everyone who has similar minds and stories to share, which can help elevate all of us to do that. So thank you all. And Quentin, where can we find more out about you to learn more?
Yeah, thank you. I don't hide. I'm on LinkedIn as Quentin Finney, and my website is pause.io. So pause.io.com.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks.
you. How about you, Karen?
So Revive Joy is the name of the business. So that's easy. It's just revivejoy.com. Also on LinkedIn. And then my email is just Karen with an I at revivejoy.com. So
Okay,
pretty
great.
easy.
Karen at revivejoy.com or revivejoy. And for you, Jasper, where can we find you in the world?
Same as Karen and Quentin. LinkedIn, best place for professional colleagues and friends. And website, a little difficult to remember, but I'll mention it. It's sunyacircle.com. Sunya, Sunya. Where I come from, India, it represents 0. And 0, of course, in the art and science of leadership can mean both infinity as well as nothingness. So sunyacircle.com, just follow on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to be in touch.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm excited for all of you to share more of you in the world with Leading with Compassion, Cultivating Connection from the Inside Out. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Karen.